with regards to indigenous people, FPIC, free, prior and informed consent, is mentioned there. And there is also an attempt to design a similar tool for non-indigenous people. You all know that FPIC is only for indigenous people agreed on, but meaningful consent is also part of it, and therefore it can be applied. But please bear with me. I stopped studying law when I was a lot younger, after 3 semesters, and then I went to study politics, and therefore I'm not the right person to answer it.
Thank you. Next on my list is Maria Plug-Pedersen, Senior Advisor for Human Rights and Development at the Danish Institute for Human Rights. I would like to emphasize that without the fabulous work by our colleagues of the Danish Institute for Human Rights, this tool wouldn't exist. The first versions of the Excel spreadsheet counted something like more than 20,000 rows connecting the principles to the binding human rights agreement. It was a very long process, iterative process, to really cut this down. I would really want to acknowledge the hard work by the Danish Institute for Human Rights, the Malawi Human Rights Commission, and in particular Ilse, who guided all of this iterative process. So Maria, you have 10 minutes and you will present the navigator to us. Thank you very much and a warm welcome, and it's nice to see you with us.
Thank you so much. Yes, and it's a pleasure to be with you today, albeit from a distance. And I'm also happy to respond to that question about the role of NHRIs in monitoring, but perhaps we'll save that for the later discussion. So yes, I will give you the technical introduction to the Human Rights and Land Navigator online tool today. But maybe just a few words about the tool, and because with this tool, we wish to really demonstrate that issues related to land and access to resources are human rights issues. And as has been rightly said now by several panelists, while there are specific rights to land and resources for indigenous peoples enshrined in ILO Convention 169 and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as well as for peasants in the more recent UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas, as mentioned, access to land and resources is essential for also realizing a number of other human rights enshrined in core binding human rights instruments, including the right to an adequate standard of living, housing, property, food, water, etc. And as mentioned by Teresa, these links have also been explained in general comments and recommendations, for example, of the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. So we're trying to bring all of this together in one tool and make human rights more accessible to the land community. And as mentioned by yes, the basis for the tool is a database. It's a really large Excel sheet. We have analyzed each paragraph of the VDGT from a human rights perspective to try to draw out the main human rights aspects. And then these have served as bridges to identify the relevant human rights and the specific standards. And for the sake of user-friendliness, we try to apply a targeted approach, so the mapping is by no means exhaustive. Of course, human rights are interdependent and therefore all relevant to the VDGT, but the mapping references just the human rights that are more closely linked to the text of each of the paragraphs. So let me give an example. For example, if a VDGT paragraph refers to consultation and participation, then we reference the right to participation, access to information, and self-determination where applicable. But for more details on the method, as well as the human rights instruments included, limitations, etc., I recommend that you check out the About the Tool tab in the actual tool. So now let me actually share the tool with you and briefly walk you through it. I hope you can see it on your screen in the room. So when you arrive on the landing page here, the Human Rights and Land Navigator, you can scroll down, you can go straight to the tool, you can read more about the tool, you can check out a couple of use cases, or you can go to the user guide, which will then again give you the option to go straight to the matrix, watch an instructional video on how to use the tool, or apply different filters, for example, going in via a specific human right that you're interested in learning more about and how it's linked from different sections of the VDGT. So this mirrors the table of content of the VDGT to an entry point of a specific rights holder group with a specific human rights instrument. So these are some examples here. Or via a land issue, and these issues have been derived based on those human rights aspects that I mentioned before. But now I'm going to go straight up to the matrix because some of these filtering options are also available there, and I'll show you how. So what you see as a default here in your search results is the VTTT section first, the VTTT paragraph, then the human rights categories, if you may, link to that paragraph with explanatory notes here, showing, for example, or explaining what the right to adequate food has to do with the particular human rights, the paragraph, etc. You can also show the article text to then see the full text of the human rights articles underpinning this. You can flip the view to show first human rights, then you will see human rights on the left-hand side. But now I'm going to go back to showing the VTTT first. And similarly, you can also show the land issues first. You can see the filters here on top, and recommend that you try to apply some of these filters in order to narrow your search, as there are quite a lot of images. So go in via a particular chapter of the VTTT that you're interested in. And if you pick a topic, for example, taxation, you'll see that it appears at the top here. And if you want to remove that filter again, you can click on it, either the individual filter, or you can remove all filters at the same time. You can also select the human rights reference in the matrix to explore more in that regard. Again, pick the land issues, a particular human rights instrument, and then importantly, you can select your country if you're only interested in seeing the links to instruments that have been ratified by that particular country. I should mention here that declarations are always included. The keyword search allows you to search the database for one or more specific words, and I should note that it will only return results if that word is in the VTTT or in the human rights instruments. So, and also it will not show results if you use incorrect spelling. So do check your spelling if you don't get any results. Finally, the show all filters option here gives a really great overview of your options and how they're linked. Because if you click a particular filter, you'll see the impact across other filters. So if you pick chapter of the VTTT, you can see which human rights are linked to that, which issues, instruments, etc. Now, let me just give you one concrete example of how you could use this. Let's say you are dealing with an eviction case and you're interested in finding out what does the VTTT have to say about evictions. Is there anything in human rights instruments that can back up your litigation, advocacy, etc.? You might find out that there's no particular chapter on eviction in the VTTT. There's one on expropriation. So you're not finding it there, but then you can apply eviction as a keyword, which I'm going to do now. And then give it a second to show the results. And then you'll see the word eviction highlighted in yellow. And if you show the article text, you'll also see how it's highlighted in the human rights articles. So you will quickly learn that, for example, UNDROP says that peasants and other people working in rural areas have the right to be protected against forced eviction.
Maria, you have 3 minutes left.
But you'll also, as you scroll down, see that there's a paragraph of the VTTT which deals with evictions, and that this is linked to, for example, the right to housing. And then you can see the human rights note to see why that is the case and get some more specificity here. So the human rights note refers to the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, particularly general comments number 4 and 7, which have clarified that legal security of tenure is a core aspect of the right to adequate housing. And also importantly for this issue of evictions, say that all persons should possess a degree of security of tenure which guarantees legal protection against forced eviction. So all people should have that legal protection against forced eviction. So just one example here of how you can explore based on issue of interest to you, and then learn more about how the human rights are underpinning that particular issue. So we really hope that this will help make human rights more accessible to the land rights community. And we're also really eager to receive your feedback on this tool. It's a new tool, and I'm sure it can be improved in many ways. So as you explore it, please comment on it. There's a contact possibility and a contact form. And we'd be more than happy to engage with you and to further improve the tool. So we'll paste the link to the tool. So with this, over to you again. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. And if you would be here, obviously you would have the chance to interact with the audience. So I would really like to take one question by you. I understand it's a rather nerdy tool, and sort of we had a lot of fun and find it very interesting to develop it. I understand that this might not immediately transmit, but if you have a question that you would like to pose in regard to the tool, this is the time to actually interact with Maria on this, because she's really the mastermind behind this fabulous 20,000 plus rows Excel spreadsheet. Anyone?
Hello, my name is Miguel Gallardo from El Salvador. I have a question. Is in this tool any application towards the registration of the documents that back up the land? I mean, like, well, the documents of your house or your property, and if this is something that you guys are taking into account, like using technology to register this in an open source or in something that will assure that these lands are going to stay in the hands of the people that should be. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question, because you're already alluding to the second stage of the development. Maria, maybe you could respond to the question by also alluding to how the Indigenous Rights Navigator is being composed to give participants an idea of what could be possible next steps of development.
So on the point of registration, so this tool simply links by paragraph the VTDT to underpinning human rights instruments. So if you put in the word registration, for example, you can see which parts of the VTDT talk about registration. For example, VTDT paragraph 17.1, the state should provide systems to record individual and collective tenure rights, and then you can see how that's linked to the right of access to information, for example, which human rights instruments back that up, etc. But yes, as Jess alluded to, we're also now working as the next step on an actual data collection tool with questions both at the national level, for example, for national human rights institutions to fill out as kind of a national profile, as well as a community questionnaire to capture outcomes to enable the monitoring of the VTDT from a human rights approach in a particular country. And there, for example, also part of the questions to a community will be around whether they've been able to access and to get legal registration of their land, etc. We have a number of questions about that to sort of uncover challenges for particular rights holder groups in relation to registration. I think that's probably all I can say about that right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria, and we would have hoped that you would be here, but it was very nice that you actually took the time to participate online. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm sure, I hope that this session will contribute to our feedback box, receiving a lot of valuable feedback. Okay, Makumbo, I think often announced, but now the floor is yours. Please, we would be really interested to learn from you how you have used the tool in Malawi. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Makumbo Muntali, I'm the Director of Economic, Social, Cultural Rights at Malawi Human Rights Commission. Malawi Human Rights Commission, according to the Constitution of Malawi, it's mandated to protect and conduct investigations on human rights violations. And when you look at the Human Rights Commission Act, it also basically specifies in terms of the key duties of the Commission to also monitor the implementation of various international human rights instruments, as well as also promote the ratification of the various human rights instruments. And we have also had the opportunity also to present shadow reports at the various treaty bodies on Malawi's progress in terms of implementation of various treaties which Malawi is party to. And another component in terms of the mandate of the Commission is that we are also mandated to examine various laws to ensure whether they are in line with international human rights standards. So when we got into the partnership with TMG and Danish Institute for Human Rights to conduct a pilot project, which is called Human Rights-Based Land Governance Project, focusing mostly on land disputes, it was basically in line with the mandate of the Commission. Now, looking at the Navigator, which is basically one of the outputs from this project, which we are doing with partnership with Danish Institute for Human Rights and TMG, you realize that when, in terms of application or how we have used it in line with our mandate, for example, in terms of investigations, we have been able to use the tool, for example, in terms of getting to understand issues to do with land grabbing, land encroachment. Also in situations whereby government has been able to expropriate land but then has not done compensations. So when you go in the VGGT, you clearly, when you go into the tool and you type the word compensations, for example, we're able to see specific provisions within the VGGT that talks about issues around compensations, the process that is supposed to be done, as well as also the relevant international human rights instruments, which are linked to that particular issue. At the very same time, the nature of our investigations also requires that whenever we are drafting the report, we have a clear component around human rights analysis, so that we're able to identify the specific human rights violation that has been committed, as well as also come up with how that can be addressed in terms of recommendations. So the tool has been really helpful, for example, when we're dealing with one of the investigations relating to Northern Region Water Board and the communities around how they were connecting water pipes passing through private houses. And then we're able basically to refer to the tool in terms of looking at how it does guide in terms of issues around consultations and all that. So that forms the analysis which we're basically working on the report. And also another critical aspect, as I talked about, our mandate is on the examination of bills. Just recently, Malawi had amended some land-related laws. There are about 6 land-related laws. This included Land Amendment Bill, Customary Land Act, Land Acquisition and Compensation Bill, as well as a Physical Planning Act. And the Malawi Human Rights Commission did an analysis of those bills to just make sure that it's in line with the human rights standards. And we are basically just developing this tool with the Danish Institute for Human Rights and TMG, and we are able to use the tool in terms of trying to find out specific international human rights instruments and specific VGGT paragraphs that are related to specific issues. For example, issues to do with valuation. We find that, for example, in the Physical Planning Act, as well as the Land Acquisition and Amendment Bill, it did not really provide some compensation where land is accessed by government, is taken from people by government. So we were able to advise the government through the advisory analysis, which we shared with members of parliament, the government, and we were able to see that improvements were made, as well as also issues to do with the compensation as well. So I think it's from that angle you're able to clearly see on how this can be useful in terms of research, as well as also for advocacy purposes. So whenever we're able to see, I was sharing with Ilse, I think at that point, some videos of members of parliament contributing in parliament, referring to the VGGT, specific articles in order to ensure that there's certain areas are basically refined. So I think from our experience as Malawi Human Rights Commission, we have been able to see that this tool can really help us in terms of making sure that we have got a comprehensive framework or analysis in terms of analyzing specific human rights issues relating to land, and also being able to use it as a tool where it can also help us in terms of our investigations, and also the other aspect around the reporting. Like currently, Malawi will be submitting its first report on International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, a state-party report. And Malawi Human Rights Commission, we are also going to compile a shadow report relating, to the same. So we already going to start using this tool in terms of specifically looking at the areas around land tenure, and in terms of checking also whether to what extent has the state party report basically addressed the issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Makumbo, also for highlighting why we believe that the national human rights system is such a strong lever to advance responsible land governance, because the national human rights institutions are mandated to have mandated reporting formats and can actually, as Mukawa has outlined, actually report to Parliament. Alexander had requested the floor for 2 more minutes to speak about digitalization and to refer to the gentleman from El Salvador. And then I would like to ask my 2 next panelists, Miriam and Violet, to please get ready, because you will have the floor next.
Thanks a lot for the question. This navigator is not prepared so that you can add the data for your own property. But what we have tried to do with this navigator is to do digitalization differently, to make it a tool for people to protect their rights. Normally, digitalization is used for large-scale land acquisitions. You do GPS and remote sensing, and then people can buy land. We would like to do digitalization differently so that it is a tool for the human rights commissions, for the farming communities, that they get the information on their rights, and the next navigator that is under preparation support especially indigenous people. So make digitalization a tool for rights. That's our approach.
Thank you, Alexander. Miriam and Violet. Thank you, Makumbo. Thank you, Alexander. And I hope we have our further panelists online, Mario and Adriano. Miriam, do you prefer to speak on with this one? Okay. I'd like to welcome my panelists, both from afar and here in the room. First of all, I would like to introduce you to Miriam Medel, who is Chief of External Relations at UNCCD. You've probably met her at earlier side events. Thank you very much for taking the time in this very, very hectic and busy period of the year. Violet is President and founder of the Shibuya Community Health Workers in Kakamega County in Western Kenya, and the chair of the Wairo Commission. We have with us Adriano Campolina, who is the head of the Land Tenure Unit, and Mario, Mario Pocucci from UN RED, who has long-standing experiences in implementing safeguards in forest restoration. Miriam, I would like to start with you first. The question, the importance of tenure rights for restoration. Can you give us a bit of the background of how you see this tool relating to your work, and the background and the rationale of the decision?
I will try with this one. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. It's really very nice to be here, and very encouraging, actually. I think the relationship is quite obvious, and it just makes me wonder what were we thinking all those previous years when we weren't making the connections. To me, it took us a long time, and Alexander already referred to this, it took us a long time to think about the Sustainable Development Agenda as one agenda. So we were always talking about the climate agenda, and the biodiversity agenda, land degradation agenda, food security agenda, etc. It's one. Well, then I think we now have to be much quicker in realizing that the human rights agenda and the Sustainable Development Agenda are the same agenda. And probably we had some time before, now we don't. So, all the experts and all the data point us to 2030 as a breaking point for when things won't be reversible in terms of the challenges that we're facing as humanity. So I would very much expect that this tool and the conversations around tenure in this convention will help us make headway in policy right away, immediately. For us, we define restoration very loosely, very generally, aligned with the land degradation neutrality concept as response actions to avoid, reduce, and reverse land degradation. And then the linkage with tenure is through stewardship, because we know that secured land rights encourage good land stewardship, which then encourages effective land restoration. So we can take it from a sustainable development perspective, and we can take it from a human rights perspective, and then it's the same. So I would very much say that is we are at the tenure rights are at the very center of both, and we hope that at this COP the parties will make the COP decision. I mean, there's another decision to be adopted in this COP around tenure. Our expectation is that it will take us one step further to advance into policy, to advance into action, and to provide a space to have the very, very difficult conversations that we need to have about land rights. Final point on the intersection and on how we can use the tool. One sector that needs to be involved also right away is the real estate sector. You were talking about how people are buying land to storage carbon. So we need to also bring them to the table to have the conversation and to see how they can also help to advance the agenda that at the end it's in the benefit of everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miriam. And I can only say from our point of view, we wish you all the best for the negotiations. Mario, with the benefit of hindsight, if you would have had the navigator at hand when you were developing the safeguards, the UN Red safeguards that have now really long established history, what would this tool would have brought to you? What would you have learned from it?
Michael, thank you so much. We didn't do the test. I hear a very strong echo. I hope you can hear me. I get a very strong echo here. Can you hear me? Can you just give me a signal you can hear me?
We can hear you. Okay. There is a slight echo, but we can hear you.
Me. I have lost connection with the event. I'm going to go ahead. And the first thing is really to say, what a pleasure it is for me to be here, to really be part of a discussion that is so inspiring on a topic that is so central. And so first, before I respond to your answer, I just wanted to say what my vantage point is. I'm the head of the UN Red Program Secretariat. This is the flagship of the United Nations system to support countries on succeeding with the Paris Declaration on Climate ambition for forest. So my vantage point is that of working with about 65 countries. We have a budget of about $350 million that we provide to support countries and stakeholders making progress in the context of the Paris Agreement. And we do that on the basis of a human rights-based approach. We have a very strong social inclusion agenda, which includes, of course, land use rights, tenure, gender empowerment, indigenous people and local communities action. So that's where I come from. I come from a climate and forest angle, but connecting to this group is very important for me. So again, I want to thank you all, and in particular, Alexander, for having extended the invitation. So what I would like to share is just a couple of reflections that will answer your question, Weigert. The first one is that we are moving from an era of goodwill, of negotiations, of commitments. Every other speaker has mentioned that, and we're now entering a decade of massively scaled up action to restore, conserve forest. And we're going to do that with a strong impetus from the climate change domain, because forest has 1/3 of the climate solution, but then in turn will deliver on many other benefits from biodiversity development, socioeconomic recovery after COVID, jobs. So this is really where we are now. And I think it was also Miriam who just mentioned this is the time to connect the dots. And Alexander, you spoke also to that point. We have to connect the dots because we are moving into an unprecedented decade of operationalizing what we have learned in the past decades. And massive operationalization does require a strong human rights approach and has tenure and land use rights at the center of what we do. So from the UN RED program point of view, as we support countries in addressing the drivers of deforestation, tenure is very important. To give you an example, because if we want to reduce the pressure on deforestation for agricultural development, for example, we need to increase the productivity of the land that is already degraded and deforested. And in order to do that, providing land use rights, security over a longer period of time is essential. For financial purposes, for the choice of crops, for improving productivity. So we see that tenure is there, and in doing that, we really are able then to harness governance reforms, agriculture reforms, institutional reforms. So we as the UN RED have been working for many years, and I know we don't have the time to get into the specifics. What I would like to see, to suggest is that we have really done a lot of knowledge management on tenure, indigenous people and local communities, gender empowerment. We're going to work very soon on carbon rights. We will do a legal comparative review of carbon rights in more than 30 countries. Safeguards is a big area of our work, but really I also wanted to echo what Faith said from an intervention from the floor earlier on about women exclusion. We see a big gender gap still in this space, and this is something that we really have to address as a matter of priority. So for us, all of us who work in this space, having a tool such as the Navigator, I think it was the previous speaker, Makumba from Malawi, to have such a comprehensive framework and analysis is super important, because it allows us to really do better advocacy, better engagements, and better capacity building at the speed that Miriam was talking about. So I'll stop here, back to you, and I hope you've heard me, because I've lost connection completely.
Okay, thank you, Mario. The good news is we have heard you perfectly well. So you were actually super able to get your messages across. Thank you very much for those. I'll come back to you in a bit. Adriano, you are responsible for FAO's land tenure unit. Now I don't see you, unfortunately, anymore. Can our most beloved colleagues give me... Finally. Hi, Adriano. Nice to have you with us. Sorry, I wasn't sure whether you're still online. Thank you very much for being with us. You're responsible at FAO for the land tenure unit, and I know that FAO is investing since 10 years in the application of the voluntary guidelines, and I was just wondering whether you could share with us your insights on how you think that the human rights system could support in the further application of the voluntary guidelines. Thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. As you mentioned, we've been the mandated agency of the UN to provide technical support on the implementation of the VGGT, and we've done it in almost 60 countries with a very strong emphasis on, number one, awareness raising, then capacity building of a diverse group of stakeholders in many countries, establishing spaces for negotiation through the multi-stakeholder dialogues, and also supporting policy reforms and the implementation of these reform policies later on. And in many countries we have had very important achievements, such as a important increase on women's land tenure rights being recognized, indigenous peoples' land rights being recognized. So it is a very fundamental guidelines for the work of all of us. I think it's important to highlight, as Alexander said in the very beginning, the VGGT did not come by chance. It comes as a response to a context in which, due to the previous food price crisis, in 2008, we had a spike on land grab, and therefore there was a need to respond And rightly so, we are possibly approaching a similar context, so we can expect the situation to again come back very strongly as an urgent issue for all of us that are in this area. So I just want to highlight a couple of things. The first one, in response to your question, the first one is that we are very clear that all that we do on capacity building, on multi-stakeholder platforms, on developing the many technical manuals that we have developed, those are some components that support a change on the political economy that is at the root of the issues related to land. All said and done, land is power. And the ability to change the power relations that are underneath a particular configuration of land tenure in different countries is absolutely crucial. What we are doing, and doing that everywhere, I think has contributed to that. But we have also observed that in many places we would get some policy frameworks, new policy frameworks, we would get people sensitized and capacity built, but the underlying power relations have not changed enough for us to be able to achieve at scale the kind of change on tenure rights and recognition of legitimate tenure rights as we would like to. So there's a lot to be done. So in that sense, I believe that this tool and the connection between human rights and land rights is exactly adding one more element that can allow that political economy to change and change towards the interests of the most vulnerable. It is a tool and it is an approach that allow people, allow smallholder farmers, allow indigenous peoples, allow rural women, allows also the youth to not only be aware and be prepared, but also to claim their rights and to hold the bearers to account, being those bearers the governments, particularly, as they are the most important institution with the responsibility to protect, to respect, and to promote human rights, but also hold to account other duty bearers that may have violated land rights. So it is one step more. To some extent, it gives a little bit of teeth. As everyone said, although the guidelines are voluntary, human rights are not voluntary. They are mandatory. They are legally binding. So therefore, I think that connection provides an extra power, an extra capacity for different groups in the society to claim their rights, to hold their bearers to account, and therefore it becomes probably what was the missing link for us to be able to actually achieve change at scale. I'll just add that also this is a tool that connects very strongly with a fundamental element on land tenure dynamics, which is the collective action. It does provide to the groups of smallholder farmers and other groups, it provides then a very important mechanism through which they can bring the collective action to also the point of holding the bearers to account, including by the use of the legal system and the human rights structure. So I think it is a fundamental step forward to the objective that we all pursue together.
Thank you, Adriano, and thank you for the praise. I beg Ilse for understanding that I go slightly off script, because I would like to build on two words or two comments that have been made. One by you, Adriano, mentioning the power dynamics that we are in fact addressing, and the other one by Mario emphasizing the massive scale that is needed. And for us, I think what was always a challenge is to bring the scale and the necessary consultative processes together, because we found always challenging sort of to see how the necessary consultations can take place if we look at the magnitude of the challenge and the magnitude of the response. And I think there's nobody better placed to respond to this question as Violet. Violet, I would pass on this tricky question on to you to please give your perception of how you see these dynamics playing out from the local level.
Thank you so much. I just want to say that as community, when we are looking at issues of land or accessibility to land, we have an expectation that this land has to change our lives. we need to see how life is improving. And now when we go to the human rights perspective, we know that our countries are signatory to instruments of human rights, and sometimes you don't see actually the part of implementation or domestication of these things. So if I give an example of like the land lease guidelines that we have developed, one of the things that we put in the second phase of the project was monitoring. And we had a very strong component of monitoring, which was looking at the adoption, how people are adopting the land lease guidelines. In the adoption, we were also looking at the government officials that are also adopting, the chiefs, ward administrators, that are actually taking this as an important initiative that is going to enhance accessibility to land, especially for agriculture. And when we are talking about agriculture, for me in my rural community, this is where we get food. For us as women, in Kakamega, most of us get food through farming, and actually food is paramount. It's important, it's basic for everyone. And when we are actually getting food through agriculture after accessing land, this is not just food for me. It's also food for the community and many other people, because I don't want to tell stories how women are coming up with even feeding programs even during this COVID-19 situation, which is because of agriculture. This is also where we get money to improve our lives. We pay school fees for our children, so there is continuity in education for our children. So I think how I link the two processes is that communities being part of this process, being able to participate in monitoring from the perspective of that basic understanding, or that, how do I call it, the small level of understanding really contributes to what we are reporting. I've been in meetings where governments are reporting, and sometimes I wonder where these facts are actually coming from. Because the real situation on the ground is we have programs, and I can just give examples, some of these programs like 1 Acre Fund, and no one wants to really check in and say, how many women are participating in these programs? Because women are not participating because they don't have land. My experience in working in agriculture is that usually when we are registering farmers, when we want like 100 farmers, we don't ever have another lens of looking at how many women, how many youth are coming on board. And the checklist is just the production. But for us, when we are using these guidelines, we are looking at the number of women participating. And also, because we know you can farm, I can farm as a woman, and I don't have control on the production. I don't have control on what I'm going to plant in my land, because my husband controls the decision. And then I end up just becoming the laborer in the land. So for us, in our perspective, we also monitor how many women are able to make decision on the production, make decision on what we grow, because some communities or some men, I'm sorry, the men in this room are very good, but some men will want to plant cereal or cash crop that will bring money quickly. But for us as women, we want to plant sweet potato, we want to plant vegetable, we want to plant things that will increase nutrition at the household level. So when we are doing monitoring, we actually look at the nutrition component at household level, which comes from accessibility to land. So our lens of looking at this is actually what the human rights perspective is actually looking for. But they may not be able to break it in that smaller context. But if they bring community on board, then we as communities are able to break it in the realistic facts that determine how life is changing, how the human perspective is being realized. If women were being thrown out of houses, beaten when they are being thrown out of land, or being denied to grow crops in their land, then when we are monitoring conflicts, for us, we look at the kind of conflicts that are really changing. Is it the humiliation part? Is it women that are being now not beaten anymore because they went to the land to grow crops, or because they planted the things they wanted to plant in their land and not their husbands were actually cared? the widows and whatever. So I think it is very important, and I like this process so much, and I'm happy that we are going to be part of this through Kenya Land Alliance, because for us, we are actually bringing the facts on the table. We are actually helping to analyze what actually determines the human rights perspective from the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Violet. And I'm always sort of very much encouraged by the powerful way you bring the message across, because it actually relates to the fundamental question that is in the 2030 agenda called follow-up and review. You have been speaking about the monitoring element, and I think the UNCCD has made major strides in developing the link to the land governance indicators, but the actual process of generating the data, I think the participatory element is only in its infancy, and I think we just heard a very powerful argument. So something we might want to take up with the parties from tomorrow onwards. Okay, Miriam, as the time is running, I think I would like to, the question that I started to pose, obviously in a very convoluted way, on